Okay, so we have now 800 subscribers on this channel, which I'm thankful for. And someone pointed it out. The 800th person who had subscribed wrote in the comments, "I'm your 800." So I figured because the person has a prepper channel, that I would, celebrate that for what it is worth. 800 subscribers, all right. But because they specified it, I'm gonna make it a thing. I figured I'd give some prepper information. Oh, and before that, I'm almost at 10,000 subscribers on my Arisha channel. So for those of you who are over there and participating over there, you know, I think it's at 9,024, 9,030, something like that. Yeah, somewhere around there. So it's about, over 900 and change short of 10,000. But I mean, not that I know what 10,000 subscribers means, like if it's significant. I guess it's not really, it's just that it's an even number. So that's what I'm saying. Okay, so I'm a freestyle on some prepper information. There's something when it comes to prepping that a lot of people leave out. They speak about the different things you need to have, like food stores, having 6 months of food, 3 months of food, 30 days of food. Obviously anything over 3 days, you could consider yourself in a prep mode. And anything over 3 days, most of the time you can begin to acquire now. Water, for instance, 3 days worth of water. Typically we use about a liter a day of water. You know, um, 3 days worth of food, of course. And in reality, depending on what kind of space you have and what kind of land you have, you can even acquire 3 days worth of power if need be. Like to be able to use your phones or things like that, right? Having extra charge packs that are charged up, or obtaining solar panels, so forth and so on, right? And then, of course, we get into talks around weaponry and ammunition and stuff like that, which I won't get into just yet. If I ever really start doing prepping videos, because I haven't really got into that too heavy as far as teaching it online. I have taught it in person, but online, some things I prefer. Some things I don't. Let's just say I don't enjoy talking about as much online. We'll just say that. So anyway, um, one of the things when it comes to prepping that's important to consider or to think about is the idea of resources, right? And like I said, a lot of times when we think about resources, we kind of limit it to just the gear and the food and the water, and maybe even having a location to go to if times get hard. Whether it's like I was saying, like sometimes it could be a work situation, or it could be a natural disaster, floods, things like that. All those things are happening right now. It could just be an economic situation. You hit hard times. You might lose your job, or there's a lot of other things that can happen when we talk about economics, right? So, with that being said, one of the resources that a lot of people leave out is the human resource. I would say, honestly, there's two things that are most important in a survival situation, and that's connection to human resources and your intellectual property. Those two things, because your education and your know-how can keep you alive. For instance, let's say if we have those who have the ability to, who have medical experience in the medical field, can handle things like, gunshot wounds and stuff like that. Well, their intellectual property would be of a high commodity in a now we're talking like a collapse situation, but let's just say an emergency situation. Um, and they may not have a bag of rice that they saved. They may not have cans of salmon or tuna fish or anything like that. but their intellectual property will serve as a great currency to allow them to navigate to different places. So that's one of the things to consider, right? When we think about a situation like an emergency or a collapse, what is it that you have stored here? Because even if you have 3 months of 30 days of food, 3 days of food, 6 months of food, it's depending on, you don't know how long a situation may last. So your food may run out. And once your food runs out, do you know what to do next? Right? So that intellectual property is important. Getting that education now, knowing what to do, knowing where to be, where to go. And this is where we get to the human resource, knowing who to be around. Because a lot of times it's the value of community that many of us are missing out on for various reasons. But it's that value of community that's going to carry you through. Being around people who are not necessarily trying to hurt you, being around people that you can barter with, that you can, as they say, circle the wagons with, and make sure that you can protect your community. Those who have similar ideology, and a similar viewpoint as it comes to survival, and most importantly, what aspects of your community and your civic assemblage need to actually survive. Some will be like, well, we need to save the church and do everything we can to keep the church, and then others might be like, no, we need to break the wood up in the pews in the church so we can use it for firewood, so we can stay warm, so having the similarity in thought is important. So I would say your greatest thing that you need to work on in terms of survival would be, your human resource, getting around good people, qualified people. Be mindful of the people right now, even if you're in a non-survival situation, the people right now who are sucking and draining life out of your cipher, who bring nothing to the circle. Every time you talk to them, they're either asking you for something or they're venting their hard luck life all on you. In a survival situation, what are they really going to do but suck more life out of you when you're in a situation where you may not be able to afford that? So I would say monitoring your circle in that sense, and being able to keep your circle tight in a survival situation, which is really now. But I would say that would be an important thing to consider, in terms of human resource, in terms of gathering people around you with intellectual property. Excuse me, my nose is still, I've been pulling some of my old texts out of boxes and stuff like that over the past few days, and the wiping them down, but there's a lot of dust inside of some of those books. Some of them have been sitting from some time, so that's why I'm kind of congested or whatever. But getting around people who, okay, maybe this one knows how to grow food. This one is good with weapons over here. This one over here just has basic survival skills, knows how to, scout for certain things and secure water, secure things like that. And, we might be speaking in an extreme situation, but getting yourself around people who have thought about what it means to be prepared and who have started on that work is key in terms of securing the proper human resources around you, right? And those human resources that hold certain intellectual property, right? Now, this next thing I'm going to say may not necessarily... It applies to everyone. However, everyone may not realize it applies to them because it affects all of them. I've spoken about prepping and survival all these years that I've been presenting podcasts and videos, which has been like since 2010, 2011, around there. So we can say about 10 years, approximately, right? I mean, before that, I had a radio show. But I won't even count the radio show. I had several radio shows, but a lot of you don't know anything about that. You only know about me from probably YouTube or Blog Talk Radio. So we'll just start there. But I had an FM radio show many years ago, right? But everything I've been talking about has been surrounding prepping. I'm trying not to sneeze. I got a lot of dust. I'm trying not to sneeze on camera. I'll probably drop the phone and go flying in the air. All right, but so I'll make it quick. So let me try that. Let me assault my nose. But so I would say based on that, right? That information has always been in. This is an important thing that I'm just going to drop this on you. I'm not going to go into it. I may not go into it at all online. This is like more for me. It's more of an offline conversation. For those of you I build with offline, but for those of you online, just to commemorate the 800 subscribers. I think it's like 802 now, but we hit 800 last night. But so 1619, right? 1619 was the documented year that those 20-something indigenous individuals from the continent now known as Africa, once known as the Kibalan, were brought up from the Caribbean and brought to Virginia, the state here known as Virginia, as a part of the enslavement process, right? Or what we call the Ma'afa. Now, I'm going to sneeze. I'm going to pause this. Okay. Moving books around is no joke. So, like I said, 1619, you had 20 or so original people who were brought to Virginia to work on to work as labor, obviously, slave labor for individuals there. Now I'm just going to say that, and then I'm going to say this. Some places on the continent of the Kibalan have been speaking about the year of return. This year, 2019, being the year of return. Because a lot of people who know that I go back and forth to the continent a lot have been asking me about that. What's it all about, the year of return? Year of return. I don't know. I've been returning. I don't. Right. But I know what it's about. So, for those of you who understand the value of Bible law and the prophetic information that's contained therein, because prophecies are hidden in many texts, man. Because so many of us are so dead set on living against the law, being outlaws as we see it, we just ignore things that are more valuable than we realize. So that book speaks about the 400-year period of enslavement for the children of Israel. And the things that would happen, one of the things that they would be like strangers in a strange land, if you will. And the things that they would try to establish and create would not succeed. They would all fail. And this would happen essentially because they violated the laws, statutes, and commandments of Yah. All right. Now, again, I'm just giving that information. I mean, many of you know, in terms of a lot of you are my students. So you know the type of information that I teach. And you know that I don't limit myself to West African. Well, I can't even say that because this actually is West African. Prophecies about the children of Israel are absolutely West African. I'm going to tiptoe around that one, though. That's when I'll talk about boldly in person, but on the internet, yeah. But so I'll just say that it was prophesied that they would be taken into a land in the halls of ships, and you can look at, some would say, well, that's the enslavement period, outlined when they were in Egypt. But one thing about, the prophecies, spoke about in that book is that they are not limited by time, by linear time. So some of the prophecies speak about the reverse prophecies, where they speak about things in the past, and some of them talk about things in the future. Certain things that are cyclical, if you will. And it's also always important to understand the work that Benjamin Banneker did when he designed Washington, D.C. to mirror Kemet, ancient Kemet, also known as Egypt. And that's why you have my neck is a little tight. But that's why you have so many of the secret societies in this country base their ideation off of really trying to recapture and reclaim the position, the spiritual position and energetic position of ancient Kemet and the ancient Kemetic priesthoods. So you'll start to understand that captivity, or that Egyptian captivity, could also be specified as what has been experienced here. Just, I'm just coasting along the surface. I'm not going to dive into the water this. If you're at an Anu retreat and we're sitting around the fire, what did we do last time? I think, Brother Charles wanted to make s'mores. And they actually went to the store and got some vegan marshmallows and graham crackers and made s'mores. I'm laughing, but I'm glad when we can have events like that and people can relax and have fun. That's probably not something that everybody would have done in their every day. But anyway, so 1619. Well, 2019 marks 400 years. So, like I said, one of the things that was specified was that anything that we would attempt to build, or not we necessarily, maybe children of Israel, the Hebrews, that it would not prosper, right? It's kind of interesting when you look at, all of the things that we've tried to do here in terms of organization, movements, missions. At some point, and this might be hard for people to hear, this may be my thumbs down point, I don't know, they've all failed. Every last one of them have failed. Now, of course, we'll say, well, we've made some progress, but they've all failed. Their intentions and their goals were not seen through to completion. Most often, the leaders were discredited, died in squalor, or were killed or jailed. So anyway, when we're still talking about prepping, by the way, again, intellectual property, you got to know stuff. You got to know why crashes occur, why collapses come, even why natural disasters occur. You got to know those things in order to prepare properly. Learn something about the stock market, learn about the real estate market, learn about money, and things like that, or fiat currency. And then you'll start to understand even better, like why things, this is why crashes are occurring. This is why the housing market is collapsing, or they keep lying to us and telling us about all these new jobs. But meanwhile, all of these people have been put out of work this year. All of these layoffs occurred, and, and what a housing bubble means when you hear them say the word like bubble. What does that actually mean? Or the fact that, you had the recession in 1930s, but there was a recession in 1921. A Great Depression in 1921 that people don't talk about. Why is it they don't talk about that one? Well, because the government didn't come in to save them in the same way that they did later, or the parallels between ancient Rome and modern day United States. Did you know that Rome had a system of welfare that 20% of its population was on? and they had what was called the bread and circus, where they would give them free bread or free wheat, which was welfare. And then the circus was the gladiator games, quote unquote, or death matches, all to keep the people distracted and pacified. Even in ancient Rome, that when you went into government facilities, citizens would take, if they had coins, they would take their coins and they would snip just a slither of their coins off, and then they would put them in a bin, and then the government then would later take those slithered coins and they would make new coins out of them. Anyway, I don't want to get off into all that because I'm about to tell you why nickels are not made of silver anymore. I don't want to get into that. Or why pennies are not copper anymore. Same thing Rome did. Same thing. But anyway, I was actually just talking about, 400 years. And I'm just going to say that. I'm just going to throw that out there. It's been 400 years since 1619. And now you have these West African countries speaking about the year of return in 2019. Exactly 400 years later. So I don't know. I'm just going to say that. And all I'm doing is sparking conversation. That's all. I'm sparking discussion that you can have in the comments. Not putting too much out there, not putting little out there. I'm putting a lot out there. But like I always say, it's for those who have ears to hear and eyes to see. A lot of things I may say won't really mean anything to you unless you're pointed and aimed towards a certain way. And in other things, you may listen and say, I know exactly what he's talking about. But like I said, 400 years of captivity for the Hebrews, children of Israel. And the reason being is because they violated laws, statutes, and commandments. And of course, laws, statutes, and commandments are three different things. Okay, so there's a reason we say laws, statutes, and commandments. For us, a lot of times what we experience here as a lot of our problems, even spiritually, is the fact that we violate statutes. Statutes are essentially what tell you how to function in a social society. Basic things, not basic, but things to do, like how do we marry? How do we eat? What do we do when a woman is on her menses? Those are like the statutes of how we move through, but those things help us to stay in alignment with nature. And when we violate those, we become wicked. Wickedness is when you go against the natural order, and wickedness brings disease and sickness. So it's the violations of those statutes that cause us most of the time to have to run to spiritualists and priests and psychics to try to figure out what's going on with us. 9 times out of 10, it's just that you violated the statutes. And the problem is because many people are of a very rebellious mind and foolish mind, they don't want to get back in alignment. They just want parlor tricks. Well, can't you pour out some of this or blow a cigar on that or that and fix it? Nah, doesn't work that way. That's a whole nother video I'll talk about at some point, maybe. You guys know I don't really do a lot of videos. Sometimes I'm doing it now because I'm letting this dust kind of settle in my system for a minute. But I'm ready to get up and make my next move. All right. So this is the in between the moves video. All right. So let's think about that. Your best tools in prepping are your human resources, those that you put around you, and seeing yourself as a resource. And also the intellectual property. Get educated on things. Learn about planning and growing and, learn the difference between a clip and a magazine when you're talking about weapons. Maybe you might want to even learn a martial science to prepare your body a little better. If you're on medication that you can get off of it. These are great things. A lot of people talk about prepping a lot, but they're not even physically ready to really prep. They can't even walk a block or 2 blocks or be without certain foods or be without certain machines, that they need or medication. And that's always something to think about, even in terms of prepping. What if we're ever in a situation, there's a lot of people who have to take medicine in order to control their mental and emotional impulses. So what happens when they're no longer able to get access to that medication? What do the streets become? That's something to think about, where you're living and who you're living around. So I'm going to leave you with that. And I'm just going to say, like Peter Tosh, 400 years, 400 years, 400 years. All right. Always dropping hints for those who, like I say, the wise only need hints and tips. The wise don't need that much explanation. So I'm speaking to the wise. All right. To such time. Peace.